My colleague, the Reverend Peggy Clark, serves Community Church of New York and tells a story about a time that circumstances influenced a decision that disrupted the usual patterns of their congregation. Now, Community Church is a church that is somewhat like ours and somewhat different from ours. It's a church in the city, right in the center of the city. It's about the same size as ours. It's different in that it is in a very large city. It is on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And it's different in that at one time it owned 6 buildings. And this story picks up with that knowledge. So in 2022, Community Church was preparing for its first Christmas Eve service since the onset of the pandemic. They had a tradition familiar to many of us. Each year they gathered to sing the Christmas portion of Handel's Messiah, a tradition that was done here for many years. Their tradition had been disrupted by a few years of virtual services, but the community was abuzz with its return. They just had one major problem. They had recently sold 5 of their 6 buildings, including the one that housed their sanctuary. So they were now renters in another church's space. And that church, an Episcopal church, made space for Community Church to come together for worship on Sunday afternoons. They still gather there. They worship Sunday at 2 p.m. every week. Unfortunately, Christmas Eve posed a new challenge. See, this Episcopal church said, no, we're very sorry, but we simply don't have the flexibility to rent out space on one of the 2 most heavily attended Christian holidays of the year. It's not a surprise. Even for us, Christmas Eve is one of our most heavily, if not our most heavily attended services. And of course, an Episcopal church would need to use their own space. So there was Community Church without a space on what was also their biggest holiday gathering of the year. But what they did have were the steps of a brownstone. It was their one remaining building, and they had their voices. So on the coldest night of that year, a night where officials were warning people to stay indoors and check in on neighbors, where Reverend Peggy tells that she was certain that people were just going to start calling at any minute saying, "It's too cold, I'm not coming. It's too cold, I won't be there." Instead, Community Church brought their Christmas Eve worship and their Messiah sing to the streets. People showed up. Everyone came bundled in their warmest clothing. Someone brought hot chocolate. People passing on the street stopped to listen. Neighbors opened their windows in that way that happens in a city where you just lean out and take in what is going on around you. And church happened without pews, without a sanctuary, with a whole lot less structure. Since that Christmas Eve, Community Church has been intentionally doing work that they call disrupt church. And I borrowed that term from them, but they have really invited UU communities to engage in this work together, to borrow that term and to think about what disrupt church might mean in each of our own contexts. This is work that is honest, it's vulnerable, it's a little scary, and it's a lot of fun. It starts with this premise. Church, as we have done it for generations, is no longer working. Yikes. That's a really scary statement. It's also a relatable one, right? Even when the whole of our congregation looks strong, when programs like our Tuesday suppers thrive, we see people less frequently than we did just 20 years ago. Our lives have become so busy that often Sunday morning is the only time available to family or the only downtime that we get. And so we opt for lying in and for sharing breakfast around a table or curled up on our couches more often than not. Even me, I'm supposed to be the minister, right? And like setting a good example. Ask me when the last time I went to church on my Sunday off was. I don't remember. I go to another service during the week, right, that is for me once a month. But when I get that coveted Sunday off, I too am like, what if I just lay here and listen to the world go on around me? So, since you know that I do this, you know that I'm not talking about this to shame anyone. I don't believe that there's anything that mandates that we come to church with any sort of frequency. And when I was a chaplain, people would apologize to me for not coming to church regularly or going to church. And I think that's because in the tradition that the majority of my patients were in, there is an expectation and there is an imposed guilt for not going to church, right? But I would say to them, we need different things at different points in our spiritual lives. And sometimes that's the Sunday morning worship service, and sometimes it's not. I strongly believe that Sunday morning is just one of many points of connection we make with our congregation in any week or month. It's why I've talked with some of you about a focus not on our worship attendance, but on our engagement throughout the week. Are you active in justice initiatives? Do you participate in committees, care for our property or our garden, serve our neighbors food, give rides or cook meals or teach or learn or sing? We talk openly and often about the realities of this year, 2025. In the ever-moving target that is federal policy and practice, we always feel like we are racing to keep up. Sometimes we are directly impacted by a change. Our access to employment, to education, to school sports, to healthcare. Sometimes we turn toward our Commonwealth, hoping more local policy can protect us, like the mandate here in Massachusetts that we all have access to an insurance coverage for COVID and flu vaccines this fall. When I listen to family in other states argue for their access to vaccines, I feel pretty grateful for this imperfect state that is Massachusetts. It is not rare that I find myself sick of talking about the current state of our world, but I was recently reminded of the story of A.J. Must. Is anybody familiar with that name? So A.J. Must was a Dutch-born American pastor who was involved in pacifist and labor union actions throughout his life. He was a leader in the textile strike up in Lawrence in the early 20th century. And later in his life, it is said that A.J. Must held a single-person vigil in protest of the Vietnam War every night for years. Regardless of the weather, Must was present outside the White House nightly with a single candle. And when a journalist asked him if he really thought those nightly protests would have an impact on the leadership of our country, Must responded that he was not showing up in protest to try to change our leaders. He was showing up so that our leaders would not change him. I am not here to change our leaders. I am here so that our leaders do not change me. What a perfectly succinct and profound reminder of why we are here. Above all, we are here so that our deepest core values are not changed by disruption to laws and policies meant to care for a people. Not changed by the ways that we are emotionally spread thin. Not changed by hate. I wrote a paraphrase of A.J. Musk's words down a couple weeks ago. Since then, I've written it in all of the places that I regularly find myself working or thinking. It's in my notebooks and on the wall above my desk, at home on my desk here. It's tucked into my wallet now and taped to my bathroom mirror. And it has led me to thinking more about this idea of disrupting church. Reverend Clark borrows from the work of British author John Alexander, who describes 3 distinct models for society: subject, consumer, and citizen. Now, if you're interested in spending more time in depth with those ideas, his book is really interesting. Alexander describes them like this. In a subject society, people are subject to a single leader. They depend on that leader for security. They honor and obey that leader. There's a hierarchy of the value of people. Must is coming from an English context, right? So here he holds up the monarchy as a really good example of this. It's a model that drove society for generations. And then in the 20th century, it was displaced by the consumer society. People became focused on themselves and independent. Independence was held up as, in fact, the highest ideal. Who feels like they're supposed to be independent? A lot of us, right? But let me ask, if your neighbor, someone you cared for, if your friend, if your family member turned to you and said, I can't do this thing anymore, I need help with it, would your response be to tell them, well, figure it out, you're supposed to be independent? No, because we hold ourselves to this standard, right? But we also believe that our highest ideal is interdependence, and I'm getting there. So we've prioritized material goods, ensuring that our voices are heard. We've talked of rights and choice and fairness and balance, and we had felt like we found our place. We are independent. We are consumers. But, says Alexander, that's not the end. There's a third option, the story of the citizen. And in our US context, with a hyper-focus on documentation and who does and doesn't belong, we need to put aside our understanding of what it means to be a citizen, because we are not talking about the type of citizenship that is, I belong to this country more than someone else. John Alexander wants us to understand the term to mean someone who is a full participant in their society. A citizen's story, listen to these words, is one that is interdependent, with a focus on networking, creating together, facilitating, and a sense of purpose. And so here's where the church tie-in comes, right? Which of these, subject, consumer, or citizen, sounds like the church community you want to be a part of? That's a real question. Which of these sounds like the church you want to be a part of? I heard citizen. I see somebody holding up 3 fingers for the third. I see another 3. Yeah, me too. We even find in the explanation of a citizen society words from our own UU values. Interdependence is right there at the forefront. It's not easy, though, is it? When society at large is focused on a consumer story, it is really, really, really hard to shift our patterns in this church space. Now, I'm biased, and you're my people, so I happen to think that we have a head start over some congregations on this. We have a large network of leaders here that we turn to for all areas of church life. I went to look at some numbers to get a sense of how much of our church is actively in leadership, and it looks like about 1/3 of you are pretty strongly engaged in some sort of active leadership. A full 1/3 of you. And that might sound like not a lot, but I have been in congregations where 30 people show up to worship and only 5 of those are engaged in leadership. So we've got this start, but I still wonder where we might find new opportunities. How can we meet not just the needs, but the wants and the hopes of this community of people here who choose one another? And how can we meet the needs and the wants and the hopes of those who just might be looking for a community like this one? How might we disrupt our older ways of doing church to meet the moment of today? So I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. This is a 3-part series, so I'm not going to wrap it up nicely. I'm going to leave you with some questions. I'm going to let you ponder this over the next week, and if you're not able to be here next week, there's going to be a chance to engage with some of this on our bulletin board at the back, so there will be a chance to share some ideas anyway. Maybe we can pull the recording of the sermon and make it available to everyone. That's not something we commonly do. I see Paul nodding, so that's great.